get some answers to questions, and there were quite a few questions raised during public comment. Would staff or our guests like to respond to any of the questions that were raised?
Various program and USDA experts and et cetera in the audience too, they can help answer some of these questions. One of them that came up towards the end was the number of twist ties on a property or in a tree. That's somewhat variable. As I said in my presentation, the rate of application would be 250 twist ties per acre. So depending on the size of your property and also depending on, for instance, the number of trees. So if you had a 5th acre property, that would come out to about 50 twist ties. If you had 10 trees on that property, that would be about 5 twist ties per tree. You can do the math up and down depending on the number of trees, size of your property. It gives you a sense. So 5 twist ties on a tree, it's not very visible. If you had 1 tree on it, 50 twist ties on a tree would be more visible. You know, like I said, you can do the math. We've done a lot of, we've heard a lot of discussions about the risk of this pest and the actual damage in California. We've heard, I even had Dr. Harder and Mr. Rosendale studying in one of my slides where they talk about the biocontrol and integrated pest management programs in New Zealand for the maintenance of this pest, where their goal isn't to eradicate, their goal is only to control and in order to produce a crop. The process is completely different than the concept of eradication. In New Zealand, you're looking at a situation where the entire country is infested. If you want to produce a crop that's subject to light brown apple moth infestation, you have to implement a control process and essentially clear out an area by doing mating disruption, doing biocontrol, doing soft pesticides, doing hard pesticides. All of those kind of products are under use in integrated pest management programs in New Zealand in order to produce a crop. So yes, it's integrated pest management in its very true sense. Some of them focus more on IPM, meaning on biological control, some more on the harder pesticides, depending on the level of infestation. But to say categorically that it's not a major impact on them, they've learned to live with it, that's the consequence we're trying to avoid here in California, United States. Because it's not just the consequence on the crops, it's the consequence in the entire environment. One of the aspects of the study that Dr. Harder and Mr. Rosendale did is, and kind of speaks to, you know, going down on a 2-week tour to New Zealand and coming back with a hypothesis that speaks against years and years and years of studies from experts in New Zealand and Australia and in other countries, including the United States, is how is that possible in a 2-week study? And they make a statement, an example of one of the statements in the report is, in the southern islands of New Zealand, the pest is not a problem. They didn't go to look, but they categorically state that it's a place where there's no population because it's too cold. Yes, the experts in light brown apple moth, when they review that report, say, what do they mean? There's some of the highest populations in New Zealand are in that area that they indicate. So you have to, you know, we're getting to a battle of what one expert says versus another. The other issue that comes up all the time is Dr. Carey's theory of 30 to 50 years based on the model of spread of light brown apple moth. It's really based on the model of spread for gypsy moth in the eastern United States. And the model is, you know, probably not an appropriate model to use, and I'll give you the reason why. Gypsy moth was introduced in the United States in the 1860s, when we didn't have gas-powered vehicles. We didn't have semi-trucks that you could load up thousands of plants and ship in an hour and a half or 2.5 hours from Soquel to Katati, infested nursery stock. It took 50 years for gypsy moth to move from its point of introduction in a horse and buggy era to an era where they could find visible and widespread defoliation. Still before the advent of large-scale transportation. Now gypsy moth infests 13 million acres in the eastern United States. If gypsy moth appeared in California, you'd see a very similar phenomenon to what you might expect to see right now in Sonoma County with light brown apple moth. It will take time, if you don't do anything, for light brown apple moth to reach population levels where it's going to create the damage. And that's where we had a failure in trying to help the judge understand the nature of an emergency when it comes to invasive species. If you wait till the damage is done, you waited too long. You'll never get it back out. And that's the whole principle behind the problems of invasive species. You can't take it back once it's permanently established. That's one of the other speakers made that point. You can't take it back out of the environment once it's here to stay. You pay the consequence forever. One of the things that we talk about frequently in that consequence, in the urban environment, there's UC studies that have gone on over and over again. You talked about earwigs, you talked about ants, you talked about cockroaches, and many other invasive species. The UC studies categorically make it clear that the urban homeowners do not use pesticides in a safe manner. And if I've spent all my time in putting out a nicely landscaped yard because it's beautiful, and so many Californians around this part of the country enjoy doing that, being a home gardener, and they take pride in their yards. If they start finding damage from light brown apple moth or any other invasive species, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to go visit their local hardware store and pick up what's convenient. And they're going to make it against something that surely works. And while there's plenty of people around that say, hey, I'm going to pick it off the bushes and I'm going to spray BT, there's plenty more that don't. And they spray 2 or 3 times what they should, and they don't dispose of it correctly. So those are part of the consequences of the argument of invasive species and why it's damaging.
All right, thank you, John. Did you have?
No, I thought you were going to ask a question.
No. Does the board have any questions?
I don't know the nature of the issues being discussed.
Thank you. A couple questions and a couple comments, and for whoever wants to answer. There's reference to consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Address Fish and Wildlife.
Hi, Supervisor Riley.
Would you identify yourself for the record, please?
Thank you. I am Maria Borge. I work for the United States Department of Agriculture Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. I'm an endangered species biologist. For the purposes of the Sonoma County treatment area that we're looking at, the Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service have been contacted about the placement of the twist ties. In particular, the Fish and Wildlife Service has a co-occurrence of the California freshwater shrimp that is co-located within the treatment area in Larson Park. We've conducted a site visit with Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service on June the 10th to look at the site and identify measures that would be implemented to avoid any kinds of impacts. APHIS just submitted a biological assessment to the Fish and Wildlife Service for their review and concurrence. That process normally takes 30 days. National Marine Fisheries Service is on board with the protection measures that we have employed to protect the California freshwater shrimp will have no impact on their trust resources, in this case the California coastal steelhead. So the consultation issues with regard to the Endangered Species Act are taken care of.
And you're expecting that's going to get resolved within about a month? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
One of the folks who testified asked a question about disposal. What does happen to these twist ties once they're used and once you take them back out of the trees? Where do they go?
They follow all the label requirements for the disposal of those, and the label requirement is just to bag them up and dispose them in the trash. You don't require hazardous waste treatment.
One person I haven't heard from is our own public health officer, Dr. Gonzalez. And Mary, if you'd come up for a moment, please. And just simply from your perspective as our public health officer, are you aware of any, with this twist tie program, of any human or environmental potential damage that we might be facing with that?
Well, I have had the opportunity to review the information that was provided by the California Department of Food and Agriculture. as well as various sources of scientific literature regarding the light brown apple moth plan and the proposed use of the isomate twist ties. Also had the opportunity to discuss this with the OEHA, as well as the Environmental Health Investigations branch of the state. In addition to talking to other health officers in counties where twist ties have already been used, as well as our county environmental health director and the Ag Commissioner. The information is not that different from what's been presented. The twist ties are level 4, very low toxicity for oral ingestion, and the isomate LBAM is considered low toxicity, or category 3, in terms of dermal irritation. Shows that in very high doses, pheromone products can cause mild to moderate skin and eye irritation. Materials that cause eye and skin irritation can reasonably be expected to cause some mild respiratory irritation if a sufficient amount is inhaled. However, the concentration of isomate that will be released with the twist ties is very low, and therefore unlikely to cause skin, eye, or respiratory irritation. The placement and removal of twist ties in the trees by the CDFA staff reduces the likelihood of direct contact with the product. To further reduce the possibility of skin or secondary eye irritation, I would make the recommendation that CDFA provide residents with clear instructions to follow in terms of washing hands and or eyes if for some reason a resident has contact with a twist tie. Information should also be provided by CDFA to residents to contact a specific state number to speak directly with a health professional or contact their own private physician if they are concerned that they may be experiencing symptoms related to twist ties. Such reports can be tracked by the state monitoring system. All information should be made available both in English and in Spanish. We will also make this state contact information available through our department. Pheromone products, including twist ties, as has been stated here, have been used in organic farming in Sonoma County for over 10 years. The likelihood of health effects from the proposed pheromone twist ties is very low in the concentrations and the manner in which they are proposed to be used. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Dr. Gonzalez, thank you for that information. And I think it's good for us to hear independently from our own folks on this, and appreciate the research that you've done into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mary.
And just a couple of comments to sum up, and I hope that CDFA has listened to those 2 recommendations and is prepared to follow through on them in terms of anything that happens in Sonoma County. Assuming there's a need at all for this program, and that's based on the testimony, we've heard a fairly large assumption, but I'm certainly not prepared to, publicly oppose the twist tie program that's been proposed, mainly because what I'm hearing from the ag people out there is that in order to, they're not as worried about the moth as they're worried about quarantine. And if they're going out there and they're spraying their vineyards and they're doing that kind of stuff within the quarantine area, from my perspective, that probably has more damaging effects environmentally than the twist ties would have in the area, if that's going to help them not have to do that spraying. And so from that perspective, it's a less damaging alternative. But I would be prepared, if my colleagues support that, to support a formal position opposing any kind of spraying, aerial or ground spraying, until and unless the Department of Agriculture can provide us substantially more evidence than we've heard today, justifying the emergency and those kind of measures in our community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor. Any other comments, Supervisor Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate staff as well as CDFA being here and providing this kind of opportunity to hear information, as well as answering most of the questions that came up during public comment period, at least of the ones that I had written down. I guess my comment would be more along the lines that this, the impact of a quarantine area is significant, and it's significant to the agricultural area that we value here in Sonoma County. I do think that this type of invasive pest from an outside area definitely has an impact, and kind of ending its spread now is probably, in my mind, of key importance. I don't think we can underestimate the impact if we didn't do anything about it. At least in reviewing all of the paperwork and information that I've gotten over the last 5 or 6 days, including today, the proposal for the twist ties is really a low environmental impact solution, not only to eradicate but also stop this pest spread. And it's a low risk type of activity, and I think that the benefit from that low risk is not only to those that are within the current quarantine area, but also throughout Sonoma County, that prevents its spread. The fact that it's a small infestation, that that it can be easily eradicated with the ground application, it also, in my mind, prevents what I don't think we want to see, and I know we don't want to see, and that is spraying. So I applaud the CDFA actually, coming here. I applaud Supervisor Brown having this opportunity to not only hear from the public that are concerned, but also those that are affected, and also be able to get the kind of information that we've had presented before us today, and would hope that when there is the application of the twist ties, that there are done in Sonoma County as per some of the recommendations that we heard, not only from our own health officer, but also with the sensitivity that we make sure that this pest doesn't spread. And the fact of the matter is the affected area and the classification of a quarantine has a significant effect, and I don't want to see that spread either to any other part of the county. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do appreciate the opportunity not only to speak, but also to hear from the affected and interested public.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Brown?
Yes, I first of all want to thank the board's indulgence when I asked you a couple of weeks ago to listen to what was going on in Sonoma Valley. I didn't realize it'd be 2.5 hours, but I'm pleased that you had an opportunity to kind of get the full scope of what's been going on in that particular area. I also want to thank CDFA for listening, because I'm hoping that you take back some real concerns of folks about either health issues or the eradication plan or infestation or the plethora of things that exist in people's minds about a program that certainly has some negatives to it. And I want to ask a couple of questions. One, my understanding is that any resident who wants to refuse to have a twist tie put on their property can still do that. Is that not correct?
Excuse me. Yes, a resident, if they were to refuse having a twist tie, could refuse. Ultimately, the effectiveness of the program breaks down because mating disruption depends upon having the dispersal of enough pheromone in the area of the moth to avoid the mating. If you don't have enough dispersal, you can't have an eradication program, and you can't effectively prevent the problem. So it comes down to a point where ultimately the department would have to use its authorities for abatements if necessary.
So if the state decides that the area needs more prolific amounts of twist ties, and that the residents, there are a high number of them that have chosen to refuse, then the state can override that.
We'd have to go through proceedings to get a warrant.
I hope if you do, be really careful about it. The other question I have is that is there anything that can be done about the fact that you've got 2,500 acres of grapes in quarantine? You've also got a number of nurseries, you've got a number of organic farms in the area. We've seen 2 moths. I mean, you're right, it's not a total infestation yet, and we want to certainly, and I have no problems with the twist ties. I have huge problems with aerial spraying. Is there anything that you can do to reevaluate this whole quarantine area inspection so that people feel a little bit more comfortable about agricultural crop production?
You know, the quarantine has been described as pretty draconian, and I guess in some regards it is draconian because you can't afford to have life stages moving out of the area and starting an infestation somewhere else. To visually inspect every single leaf on every single plant is not a very possible thing to do, and that's why the aspects of the quarantine seem so draconian, because you can't do that all. But the requirements are designed to keep it from spreading. We can, I made note of the gentleman's and made a question about that, and we can communicate with them about exactly how it's impacting them and see if there's any room to, you know, help them continue to be able to move their commodities.
I will guarantee you that the grape growers are expecting a relief.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm asking that you work with them and also the nurseries to come up with some kind of tool that makes it a little bit easier for them in terms of not being quite so draconian in terms of a quarantine.
We will be in touch.
I appreciate that. The last thing I'd like to ask the board is, Jared Huffman has AB 2765, which limits the emergency powers of CDFA, use of aerial spraying in urban areas, included but not limited to Alabama. I'd like to ask that we look at that piece of legislation and ask the Ag Commissioner to give us some comments and suggestions about whether that might be a positive for us on this board to support. We currently support lots of legislation which makes sense for us in Sonoma County, and at least I'm hearing from 3 members of the board that aerial spraying is not in the best interest. What does concern me though is that if we don't put the twist ties into place, the farmers are going to be encouraged to use methods of their own because, quite frankly, they've got to be scared. They've got to be scared that they may not be able to get their product to market. And I think that's a huge economic impact at a time when economy is suffering throughout Sonoma County. So I would certainly like to make sure that we do what we can to avoid them having to use more draconian methods than we would if we used twist ties. So I'm hoping that you've gotten a full range of suggestions and that you go back to Sacramento with certainly enough information from Sonoma County that you can put us in a better position to make sure that we don't have a further infestation of the light brown apple moth and that we can get our crops to market.
Thank you, Supervisor Brown, and absolutely we appreciate the opportunity to be here today to present the nature of the program and to address the concerns and receive and hear the concerns from the public and from the board. And we will react accordingly, but our goal is to prevent the problem, the damage, and the impact to the community and the growers here, just as you suggested.
I also tell you that I appreciate the fact that you've done 3 things which I don't usually see the state do. 1, you came in and briefed the supervisors. I had an opportunity to meet with Mr. Dowell and a couple of other representatives. 2, you've done outreach to some of the citizens of the area that is going to require twist ties. And 3rd, you've done kind of a town hall meeting around that. I understand that not all people could have probably participated in that, but I appreciate the fact that you've at least gone to those steps to make sure that the residents of Sonoma Valley are informed about what's going on. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Supervisor. And just to piggyback on that, I know we were unable to answer all the questions that were raised here this morning. If someone does want answers to questions and everything, how how would they contact representatives from CDFA or other agencies?
There's, I don't know, several pages of questions that we've captured. So we will address responses on the Light Brown Apple Moth CDFA website. We'll work with our office of OEHA and DPH for all the concerns that are related to the health aspects, and they'll be posted on their website. So folks can follow up. It'll be labeled under Sonoma County Board of Supervisors, July 8th, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Great, thanks, John. Yes, Supervisor Smith?
Mr. Chairman, I'll be real quick because I believe my colleagues have covered basically the concerns that I share. And it appears to me that at this stage, given that we do have an exotic species, which unfortunately has decided to bless us with its presence in Sonoma County, that some action, preventive action, needs to be taken. And although you could argue that information is not complete, I think there's substantial enough evidence to show that it's the best option we have to take the most prudent step. And I don't think anybody wants to see aerial application of anything, particularly pesticides, and hopefully if this program is successful, we won't have to get to that point. So I appreciate the presence of the professionals here in the state representation. And as Supervisor Brown mentioned, I think they've made a real effort to access the board and certainly the public, and that is very much appreciated.
Thank you, Supervisor. I'd just like to thank Lisa Correa and the representatives from the state agencies and the other agencies for being here this morning and participating in this presentation. Thank you. I want to thank Supervisor Brown for bringing this item forward to this board so that we could have this discussion this morning. I want to thank everyone who came here to listen and those who made comment, those who reside here locally, and those who have come quite a distance to make comments this morning. Thank you for that. One thing I have learned this morning is there is still much more to be learned. And I will support the twist tie program. I think based on the scientific evidence and even the comments here today, that's probably the best alternative we have at this point. But I agree with Supervisor Riley, anything beyond that, I'm going to need a lot more information than we have now. So with that, yes, Supervisor Riley?
Yeah, just quickly in terms of follow-up, Supervisor Brown had indicated that we would bring back a recommendation of support for Senator Huffman's legislation and potentially take a formal position opposing spraying. And if the supervisor takes lead on those two issues, I'm certainly prepared to support her.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's important, as the supervisor asked, that we get some analysis of that legislation and then bring it back to us, and we can make that determination at that point. Mr. Dice?
I think your board's direction is clear on the bill, and we'll be happy to evaluate that and provide a recommendation. I'm not sure if I got consensus on the spraying issue and how that is to be brought in front of your board.
Bring it in context of the bill.
Well, I think, I think if it comes in context and as it relates to that bill, I think that would give us the opportunity to make some determination in that area. And with that, is there any more comment or questions from the board? Yes, Supervisor Brown?
It dawns on me, and I've not read 2765 in its a full scope, but it may be, since it's only passed through the Assembly and it still has to go to the Senate, that there's a possibility for amending that bill to incorporate local, some kind of local connection with what's going on, that it doesn't just, even though it limits, it also provides for some kind of local input. And it may be in there, I haven't read it, so if it is, we just need to analyze it.
Yeah, that's why I think that's why we need an analysis of the bill, and then we can make that determination and even provide some input as to any potential amendments to the bill. So with that,